hope that today is super meaningful and also a lot of fun. And so I'd like to take the time now to introduce our host for today's roundtable. Her name is Leah Perry. She's the Senior Director and Head of Policy and Privacy at Box. In chatting with her over the past couple weeks and working with her at a few other events, this is something that has become clear to me over time. And that is, if you don't make sacrifices for what you want will end up being the sacrifice. And if you're not willing to take a risk, you're going to end up in the same place where you started. And because of these sacrifices and the risks that Leah has taken, she ended up differentiating herself and being the only person in the state of Maryland to have an advanced Master of Laws degree in public international law from The Hague, which landed her in Congress. And at one point, she was the highest ranking African-American woman serving on a Senate committee staff. In addition to her public accolades, Leah has made a significant impact in the private sector, holding various legal roles from Associate General Counsel to Chief Privacy Officer to Head of Policy across a wide range of industries and companies such as Change Healthcare, Facebook, S&P Global, and now Box. So with that, I want to pass it to Leah and our panelists.
Thanks, Kyle, for the kind introduction. And thank you to the Modern Counsel team, including Ashley Paris, Vienna Lupos, and others that made this event possible. I really appreciate another opportunity to co-host these meaningful events. Today's event marks the second session of our virtual series entitled In-House Counsel, The Roadmap to Success. This three-part series features attorneys from an array of backgrounds sharing their stories, lessons learned, and career pivots and setbacks that they may have overcome or leveraged in order to be the successful in-house counsel that they are today. This event emerged from years of ongoing discussions with a variety of attorneys, mentors, mentees, legal recruiters, and senior business officials about how to navigate the in-house counsel world. From my journey as a senior attorney within the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, working for two key investigative committees, to transitioning to in-house counsel work and being newly promoted as Associate General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at S&P Global, and finally from Change Healthcare to Facebook and now Box Inc. as Global Head of Policy in Privacy, Legal, and Compliance. Within these nuggets of experience, there are lessons that can be learned by others, and today we're welcoming 4 panelists to discuss their own journey. About 2 weeks ago, we held our first session on where are the jobs, and today's session equally fits well with the same theme, the pathway to success as an in-house counsel, focused on how to keep the job. Today's session will provide insight and words of wisdom on how in-house attorneys have navigated and maintained their in-house counsel career, whether it's gaining recognition for their work, creating room, time, and space for a sponsor or advocate within and outside of the organization, or navigating challenging transitions that many of us are increasingly experiencing during the pandemic. Through this event, it is my objective and hope that you take these words of wisdom and learn from them. Now let's get started and turn to our panelists. So I'll first go in order of succession, which is first to my far left. I see Andrea Fisher. Andrea, could you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Leah. I'm so happy to be part of the panel. As a former practicing attorney in law firms, I made the decision to shift over to the legal recruiting world. Having worked for one company for quite a number of years, I recently opened my own search firm, AKF Legal Search Consultants, and I work in the law firm space as well as the in-house space, and hope to provide some good insights for your audience.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And Alma Montanez, it's so good to see you. Could you take a moment to introduce yourself?
It is great to see you too. So I am Alma Montanez. I have about 16 years of experience 9 of those, it turns out, are in-house, all at S&P Global, but in a couple of different roles in the divisions, now at the parent company. And happy to share. Hopefully there's some value in that story.
Thanks, Alma. We know there's value in that story, so we look forward to hearing more from you. Shane O'Reilly at Facebook, please introduce yourself.
So first, it's an honor to be part of this esteemed panel, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, Leah. So as Leah mentioned, I'm at Facebook. I'm Associate General Counsel for IP litigation at Facebook. I've been at Facebook for about 3 years now, but prior to joining Facebook, spent about 10 to 11 years in private practice before joining, and helped to provide some insight along my journey in-house, which was, not straight and narrow, but I'm definitely happy to be in a position that I'm in now.
Thanks so much, Shane. And I'm going to turn now to last but certainly not least, which is Julie Winna. Julie, you've had an interesting journey. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Leah. And again, as echoing Shane, it's just an honor to be on this panel with these esteemed legal professionals. My name is Julie Winna. I'm in-house at Airbnb. I've been there similar to Shane for a little over 3 years. I counsel our global teams on our civil rights issues, our North America community support teams, and support our Africa business. Prior to my time at Airbnb, I served in the federal government for nearly a decade, from working at NASA to the White House to the Department of Commerce, and very windy path, and one that was a bit unexpected. So I look forward to sharing some of the insights gleaned. So thank you, Leah, and thank you to the Modern Counsel team for hosting today.
All right, thanks everyone. So before we get started, we want to learn a little bit more about the people that have joined us in the call to listen in and learn from your experiences. So I'm going to ask for a poll to be brought up. So I'll just flag for the Modern Counsel team if you could bring up a poll, and it'll be our first question, which is just getting an idea of where you are, what you're doing. So the first one is, where are you currently working? Are you in-house counsel? Are you government? Are you private practice, nonprofit? Are you a student or other? So if you could take just a couple of, maybe 2 minutes to answer this. So we're gonna let you answer, and then we will turn and get the polling results. Okay, it'll certainly be interesting to see where the majority of our audience is coming from, and making sure that we're providing some targeted discussion points that can help them. Okay, all right, so 54% are in-house counsel, okay, and about 21% are in private practice, 17% are other, and 4% is government, tied with 4% is nonprofit, but the majority being in-house counsel and the later being in private practice. Okay, all right, so then the last thing I'm just gonna flag before we start the discussion is, how many years of experience do you have? Is this a group of people that are more mid-career or junior level, or are you well advanced? So if you could just take a moment, let us know, are you between 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, or 20 plus? To give us an idea of your level of experience and potentially what you could be navigating here. Okay, all right, so 32% are 5 to 10 years, and then after that it's 15 to 20, and then 10 to 15 at 20%. Oh, and then 1 to 5. So it feels like it's a good range of between 1 to 20 years of experience. So we'll at least make sure that we provide a little tidbit of when you're in your entry level of your career as in-house counsel, and then working your way up to that 20-year mark. So why don't we go ahead and get started on our questions and opening up to our panelists for discussion. And then after that, then we'll turn to an overall Q&A. that'll be open to those that are dialed in. Okay, so I want to turn to obstacles and how you overcome obstacles in your career in terms of maintaining your position, and some of the greatest lessons you've learned in terms of overcoming that obstacle to ensure a successful, if you will, keeping your job. So I'm going to turn that specific question to Alma, Shane, and Julie. So if you could share your tidbits of wisdom there, that would be great. So why don't I start with Alma?
Sure. Well, I think it's all about adjusting your perspective. The first thing is when you come in house is realizing that while you're a very competent lawyer and probably an expert in one field, that is not necessarily what's expected of you. So it's coming into any role as in-house, understanding what your clients expect of you, what your department expects of you, and figuring out how to adjust your perspective of who you are as a lawyer to be able to deliver on that. I think that's sort of the constant game that happens over and over, because when you get stuck in the wrong perspective, it's impossible to deliver, and bad for morale, bad for performance, just bad all around.
I think I'll jump in here too, and look, I think this kind of goes back to an experience I had back in my law firm days that I think ultimately just taught me the lesson that your network is everything. I was at Hunt & Williams and had transitioned over to a firm from Hunt & Williams, Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton, and ended up getting kind of assigned, not necessarily with the lateral partners I was supposed to work for, but with a partner who was just needed some additional attorneys, needed some additional support, who was quite frankly just a nightmare to work for. And you're in that situation. You're trying to figure out how to navigate it, what to do. And I was thankful enough to have a really close friend who was in-house at a client that we were doing a lot of work for. Actually, one of my best friends from law school, told him my story, and he was essentially my saving grace. He was able to come in, talk to the folks at the firm, transition me onto work he was doing, and because of that, broke away from the nightmare partner and essentially just kind of had the dream job basically go from there. So the network that you have, I think, can ultimately anywhere, right? Whether that's firm, whether that's in-house, the network you have and the relationships that you build, I think are ultimately going to be key to your growth and success long term.
Yeah, I think I would add to what Alma and Shane has said by saying, I think one of the greatest obstacles I've had to navigate is using my voice. I think when you start off early on in your career, you're very apprehensive. If you are a woman, it's even more difficult. If you're a person of color, it's also increasingly difficult because, there unfortunately are certain stereotypes that are associated with you and how you're perceived to move in the world. So sometimes you may take things that you rightfully shouldn't have to deal with in the workplace. I mean, the workplace is a microcosm of the world. So you're going to have all types of personalities that you have to interface with. So I think gaining my voice and speaking up for myself and advocating in spaces where I need to is something that I've had to learn. I remember very vividly, it wasn't as legal related in the work that I was doing for a trip for Mrs. Obama, where especially when you're in government and you have political appointees and you have civil servant employees, and there's a little bit of tension, because the civil servants are like, we're going to wait y'all out. And then the political appointees are like, we've got an agenda that we've got to get before the next election. So there's always these competing interests, but they're really not, right? Like at the end of the day, we're all there for service for our respective nations, wherever you're dialing in from. And I found myself in a different country, in a country in Africa. And obviously there is a long history of colonialism on the continent. And I knew that we were coming over as the United States. And I was trying to be very considerate and deferential on how to manage something with their head of state and, our principal, our first lady. And, there was a moment where I could have pushed back, but it would have been like on camera. It would have been a thing. And I decided not to be deferential, and I let the person in country kind of take over in a place where I should have inserted myself, because I didn't want it to look bad on the nation. I didn't want it to look bad on my principal, like all the Americans have come over and they're doing a thing. And later on, the principal told me, hey, I saw what you were doing. You were being deferential, but sometimes it's okay to be firm, be concise, but with grace and with kindness. And that was the one thing I learned. You know, you can have a voice. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned, that I've translated into everything that I do within the legal and in my personal life as well.
Thanks, Julie, Shane, and Alma. I think you guys bring up some really good points in terms of not only how to maintain your network, but making sure that your voice is heard. I just want to flag to people that are dialed in, feel free to place questions in the Q&A chat, and we can fold that also into the conversation. I'm going to turn to the next question, which is really focused on transitions. And I feel like the three of you guys have talked a little bit about transitions already, but let's unpack that a little bit more. I'm going to first turn to Andrea to talk about a little bit in terms of, as a legal recruiter and herself as an attorney, what do you see companies are looking for in in-house counsel when they see, let's say, multiple transitions in their career, particularly in this age of COVID-19, where you see legal departments shifting and changing and role changing, et cetera? Where have you seen individuals been successful in telling their story through the transition process?
What I think transition and having multiple job opportunities is good as long as each transition makes sense. You always have to have a valid story. You know, whether it was an opportunity to increase your skill set, whether it was an opportunity to go from a small company to a much larger company, as long as your story makes sense and is credible, companies are not, you know, they're going to look at that as a positive. The problem becomes is that when you see someone who is a chronic, you know, we call them hoppers. They've just hopped from company to company, even law firm to law, you know, this is true in the law firm space as well. If you're doing that without validity and without a good story, it's going to haunt you, and you're not going to be competitive for that role.
So for you, you're talking more about individuals that, A, you want to make sure that you have a decent and credible strategy around why you're shifting. And again, credibility is key here. Let's talk about, for those that are in-house now, Alma, Shane, and Julie, when you look at your transition process, what were some of your key items to success as you're navigating transition? So whether or not it's a new manager or all of a sudden you're on a brand new team, how do you demonstrate, frankly, your worth to be able to maintain your job and, frankly, your role to be successful?
Yeah, so I think I would speak to it, not necessarily from transitioning teams per se. I mean, well, let me back up. I think there are two ways I would approach this question. One is, you know, in government, and to Andrea's point, in government, especially as a political appointee, you are moving around a lot. Like every year or every 18 months, it's a very normal thing. And sometimes that's hard to explain externally as you're transitioning out of government. You know, but I think some of the things that have been very key and critical for me from transitioning over from being in-house at the Department of Commerce to then moving over to the Economic Development Administration to lead the manufacturing agenda is ensuring that, you know, once you get to a new place, right, even within the same circle, understanding, you know, well, what are the key objectives, you know, what are the main goals, the overarching goals that this team is trying to meet by what date. So for me, it's getting in, understanding, like sinking my heels in and understanding the goals and the objectives of leadership and ensuring that I am operating in lockstep with that and in building around that, right? And then looking for opportunities to up level and further add value, right? I don't want to hold the line in this role. And then the second way that I would speak to transition is from the perspective of transitioning in administration, right? So I stayed in the Obama White House until the last day. And when in November, when we knew that we were transitioning, you are now putting together all of the briefing materials, like independent of whether or not it is your party or not. You want to make sure that the American people feel are going to be okay and in good hands with this transition. So like that wasn't anything that was taken into consideration for us. It was just, how do we make sure we prepare the principals that are coming in, ensure that they know the communities that we're working with on the ground from a manufacturing perspective. There were a lot of briefings that went into place during this kind of like 3-month, really, yeah, like 2.5-month period. So, you know, there was that transition as well. And then I would add to that, for folks who are experiencing, you know, we're all experiencing COVID now, and a lot of folks have experienced a layoff during this time. And for me, it was an opportunity to step back and say, okay, I'm leaving, I don't have a job, but I can, you know, go to all the dance classes I want, or I can go on a meditation retreat. I can get to know myself a little bit more to make sure that I'm moving in the world. Because when we go to work day to day, we get caught up in the monotony that we don't step back to make sure that we're like walking out on purpose or living a fulfilled life. So I would also encourage that with any transition to do the self-examination piece as well.
Yeah, I definitely would encourage self-care. That's absolutely true. Alma, can you talk a little bit about your transition story? So transitioning from being with a subsidiary to then going to the parent company and navigating that.
Absolutely. I mean, Lee, as you well know, I think there was a period there in 3 years, I had 5 different managers, went from individual contributor to manager, back to individual contributor, back to manager. And yeah, that's a lot. I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, and it's going to be a key theme for me, is it's all about finding out what people's expectations are. Sitting down and having as honest a discussion as you can with your manager about what's expected, what it's going to take to succeed for them, because they're all different. Their vision of the department, their vision of the role, their vision of everything is going to be a little bit different. You have to understand expectations in order to meet them. I'm a big believer in that as a manager, and certainly as an individual contributor. Another part of it is, I think from the day you walk in, you have to realize in-house it's an infinite game. There's no winning. You're just playing to survive as long as possible and do as well as you can during that time. So, you know, for me, part of the way that I was brought up culturally, you treat the janitor with the same respect you treat the CEO. And that comes in really handy when suddenly, you know, the lowly analyst becomes the head of something, and you lose nothing when the guy who was the guy 2 years ago is suddenly like relegated and demoted into a corner because the politics are what they are sometimes. I don't think it serves you well to get caught up in that. You know, we have this guiding principle as lawyers that's really helpful. The client is the firm. It's not any one of these humans who you may like or you may not like. You do your best to serve it, and hopefully that shines through and you're able to buy enough credibility so that when you need to tap on some of that social capital, somebody can vouch for you. You know, yes, she's sensible. Yes, she's reliable. No, she's not, you know, creating insane drama. This is somebody that you can go to who has a clean head, like a clear head, who can support you as a business colleague. That stuff comes in wildly handy when you're, you know, in a sprint year, which we often are. When you transition, you have to learn brand new skills and sprint uphill for, you know, months, if not years at a time. You need all the support you can get during that time. So that's sort of what I would say is focus on getting the clear expectations and make sure that you've built the credibility and the support throughout the organization to give you a little bit of breathing room when you're sprinting uphill.
Yeah, and I think, Alma, just to piggyback on what you're saying about sprinting uphill, like for me, I would have never thought 10 years ago, well, 15 years ago, that I would have gotten a privacy certification, right? And then all of a sudden been global head of privacy, et cetera. But the opportunity presented itself and I ran towards it. And here I am sitting in this role today, which I'm forever grateful for, that I took the risk and did that transition. And I think sometimes transitions are just about that. doing the additional homework to learn a new role, a new skill set in order to make yourself more marketable and more sticky within the organization. Shane, I would love for you to also just touch on this as well in terms of your level of experience when it comes to transitions. I know management changes, which also means risk profile when it comes to litigation, et cetera, may also change too.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, hitting on probably more of kind of what Alma touched on, which is, yeah, I think it's important when management changes to understand the expectations, understand, and there's the important piece, understand what your manager thinks is important to, right? Because, you know, as Alma mentioned already, every manager is different. And I think it's critical, especially, you know, for you to survive in-house and for you to continue to grow and potentially move up, really to understand the concerns of your manager and those above your manager at all. Julie also touched on really just kind of understanding the goals of the leadership, right? Kind of understanding what the leadership finds important, understanding what those guiding principles are, because, you know, regardless of what transition happens, if you have those guiding principles that leadership has provided and they are, you know, the entire department is attuned to those leadership goals, you could at least continue to rely on those, at least as a North Star, as you continue to perform and do your work. You know, pointing back to something that Andrea said on transitions in making sure that the transition makes sense. I think what's important is, especially if you have the luxury, you have to make sure that the transition makes sense to you, right? You want to be strategic about every single move that you're making. You don't just want to kind of get in an emotional situation and maybe make that jump too quickly than you really need to do. So you want to really think careful about every single move that you're making in every transition that's being made.
Thanks, Shane. And we actually have, speaking of risk and transition, we actually have a question from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and pose now because I think it's a really timely one. It says, it sounds like your careers have pivoted throughout the legal space. Were all these directions expected, and how have those changes changed you? Who would like to go first in answering that question?
I'll jump in. No, none of that was expected. I think you know, I totally agree with Andrea. You have to have a narrative that makes sense. That said, the narrative evolves, right? You go into something and you have all these expectations, especially coming out of law school. We don't know what any of these things mean. I just knew I didn't want to go to court. And I thought I wanted to focus on LATAM, so I did. But then you sort of start finding the things that you love and you gravitate towards. And I think for me, the guiding star has been just being true to myself and following the thing that I really want. I think it's a lot easier to sell a story when you actually believe the story. That said, one of the best pieces of advice I got when I left my very first job, the partner who was my mentor at the time said, "So what's your exit strategy?" As we're having a goodbye coffee, and I'm like, curious because like I'm leaving. What do you mean? It's like, no. You always need to have an exit strategy for the thing you're going into. What does it set you up for, and what is it that you want from it? What will you gain from that? Which, you know, at 26 was like a revelation. Now it makes obvious sense. But I think that's the key, right? The legal skills come, like you can gain those. You can develop. We're all smart enough. We're all capable enough. But true passion and conviction about what you're doing and why you're doing it, you can't really fake that. As Shane was saying, you know, you want it to hopefully make sense to you. I usually tell myself I want to be running towards something, not away from something. If I'm running towards it, I can explain why, and it will sell, it'll stick.
Yeah, I would say, you know, to what Alma has said, and to Andrea's point around having a narrative, I would, you know, I think you don't realize, like, it all makes sense in the end sometimes. And I think in it, like, I'm going to have to call Andrea after this because I don't know that I had a narrative, you know. I knew I knew that I wanted to take care of my family. Like that was my narrative, you know. It wasn't really rooted in I'm going to be this kind of lawyer. But directly to the question, I thought I was going to be an intellectual property lawyer. You know, I was a legal fellow for a significant time at NASA and was like, this is cool. This is rad. I'm going to do this. Like, it's amazing. And then I got like this internship to work for Michelle Obama for like 6 months. I was like, I'll do that. Then I'll come back to NASA. And then I went to DC and I stayed in DC. So it was very unexpected in the experience. There were just all these winding roads, losing a parent, you know, not having enough money to eat, like all these things that just didn't make a ton of sense to me. But it all makes sense now. And Andrea, I think you'd be proud of me. I think I've realized that, you know, my whole narrative has been centered around community and people, which was very hard for me transitioning from government to the private sector, because I was like, we're worried about money, making money, not, okay, so where do the people come in? And it's like, no, the people come in, but like, we've also got to make money. And that was a very hard transition for me, having worked in government for so long. So I think the thing that I would say is like, it all makes sense in the end. And I think even as Alma was mentioning about her mentor that said, think about the toolkit that you're building along the way and what you're adding to your toolbox. I think it's very important to think through that. That was something that wasn't intuitive for me until I had a mentor almost say something very similar. So it all makes sense in the end. And my guiding principle has just been do the best you can in the space you're in at all times, you know, and there's no task too little, too big, too small to do. And that has served me very well.
I don't want to follow that response. I want to leave that question right there because I don't think I could say anything better than that.
Yeah, I do have to say, Julie and Alma, you guys knocked it out the park. I think the key is, you know, just emphasis added here, it's being flexible. Don't beat yourself up. You're not going to have always the answer to everything, but know that every journey is a journey closer to your longer goal. And that the lessons and nuggets that you're learning along that journey will help you when you look back years later. So again, be flexible, be agile, and don't beat yourself up when things don't go totally as planned, because there's a larger plan within all of it. So I'm going to turn to a couple of other questions, which is something around your voice. And it's something, Julie, you were touching on in terms of making sure that your voice is heard, et cetera. And that is more driving after what is the best way to ensure your efforts get recognized. So this is, you're trying to maintain your job. We're all in the age of COVID. There's all these transitions happening. And you've got to make sure that you are demonstrating that not only you're executing, but you're excelling. So how do you get recognized for this work? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by turning first to Andrea in terms of some of the lessons that she's learned and seen within this space, and in terms of the tools that people are using for recognition purposes. And then I'll turn to the larger panel to give like some concrete examples that have also helped them.
Thank you, Leah. Well, you have hit on something that for the past 7 months has been just paramount in everyone's thoughts. You know, virtually everyone is working remotely. People don't love being on video. Some people relish, you know, they love it. They miss the office. But what I have spent a lot of time speaking with my former candidates, just sort of consulting with them on how can I continue to be visible when I feel so invisible right now. And I think look, being in the office, I think in some ways gives a false illusion that you are being visible and you're somehow everyone perceives that what you're doing is really active and you're working towards a goal. But that's not always the case. You could be sitting there just as easily as you're sitting at home and not really, you know, being very productive. The onus is absolutely on you to promote yourself during these times. So it's, you know, a combination, I'm sure, you know, everyone is going to mention this, it's a combination of making sure that you are connecting with the people who are important, you know, whether that be your mentors or your sponsors at work. It's a wonderful time, just as We've already talked about using this time to maybe do something that could further your career. You know, I look at myself and, you know, the weekends, I have nothing to do in New York any longer. I can't go to the movies. I can't go to the theater. You know, I'm not going to go eat in a restaurant. And that has given me that extra time to maybe do something that I normally wouldn't have time for. So whether that's learning a new skill, you know, getting some kind of certificate that could be beneficial, take advantage of that time. I think the other thing is within the workplace is be someone who organizes seminars, be someone that is visible, not just to the people above you, but also the people below you. Because, you know, in becoming successful and getting promoted, it's about managing upward, but it's also about managing downward. And you want to be known as someone who is a good leader, who is a kind leader. During these times, I think it's incumbent upon you to reach out to the people who report to you and do these mental health check-ins, find out what's going on. I think when COVID first started, everything was about, let's just check in with people. We're going to figure out the logistics. Well, that can't stop now because there are people who are struggling with, how am I getting my work done? I have to teach my kids remotely. You know, I can't get food. You know, just do these check-ins and let everyone know that you are actually still a human being.
All right, thank you so much for that, Andrea. That's frankly, that's exactly why I wanted to pose the question to you first, because you're looking at it from the lens of what companies are looking for, as far as ensuring that you're recognized for your work, but then also some practical good practices to just consider here. I don't know, Shane, Julie,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to add
Sure.
one other thing that I just, one thing is to make sure that you're also advocating for yourself. I'm surprised in so many circumstances when I've talked to people who've been passed over. And the question I always ask is, well, did they know that you wanted this role or that you were interested? And often the case is no, that they haven't, you know, really made it known what their career goals are at a particular company. But on the counter side, don't be tone deaf to what's actually going on with your company. So if you're working for a company that is experiencing furloughs or layoffs, it may not be the best time to ask for a promotion. So just be really aware of what the environment is like at your particular company.
Thanks, Andrea. Any thoughts on that, Alma, Julie, Shane, as far as your own individual experience when it comes to recognition?
I'd probably just add, and really Andrea touched on it, I think you have to be your best advocate for yourself. I think you also need to, and I guess we'll get in a sponsorship maybe later, but you know, you also need to identify advocates that will support you and that will make sure that whatever you're doing internally or even externally, that word is getting out, that people know what you're doing and are there to support you. Because I think, you know, sometimes, and maybe it's, you know, we will advocate for ourselves to a point, but I think there's sometimes people that are going to be in rooms, whether that in a law firm context, management committee rooms, that can go in and be your advocate and that can talk about what you're doing and maybe even praise you even better than you praise yourself. So I think it's important that you take care of, that you especially do that. I think another piece, and look, I think with COVID and with a lot of us being sheltered in place, I think try to take advantage of the fact that there are people that were, I think, somewhat inaccessible before they were required to shelter in place and not travel as much, who might actually be a little bit more accessible now. You know, I've even kind of found among my network, it's easier to connect with people that are in different cities or on the other side of the country than it was previously. Because before, I wouldn't catch up with them until they traveled to the side of the country I was on. Now that, you know, Zoom and these, you know, coffee chats and other types of ways of connecting virtually have caught on, I think it makes it easier for us to connect. So I'd say make sure that you're connecting with your network virtually, and then also trying to build relationships with people that you may not even know virtually. Just doing the reach outs, and really trying to at least connect and build off of that.
I would add I am exceptionally bad at self-promotion. I think as a woman, as a Latina, it's not part of my DNA. So you figure out ways around this, right? People need to know what you're up to. I'm confident in my work, that I am. But the way I find to make that stick is ensuring that I'm delivering directly to my stakeholders, ensuring that I'm setting up the time to do the work with them. If it's because I need to work through, in announcing this year, any number of companies have come up with very complicated scenarios to try to identify what the possible outcome of that has been. Well, writing good disclosure for me means I really need to understand what's going on. It means taking the time to work through these issues with these people, showing up very prepared, and then delivering something that you can be proud of. It's an easy way for, as Shane notes, to have those people, my key stakeholders, be able to speak to what I'm bringing to the table when I'm not in that room. It may not be the most efficient way of self-promotion, but it is, part of the job on the upside. So at least there's that connection. Just trying to make sure that people know what I own, so that at least my work is speaking for me.
Okay, thank you. So we have a lot of great questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to just close out our panel discussion by just doing a quick round robin in terms of how you're able to advance your career. In this case, what is your superpower that you have? If you could describe one or two superpowers that you have that enabled you to be successful in your career advancement, what would that be? Andrea?
Okay. Fearless. I think especially later on, as I got older, I realized I didn't have to really be scared of anything. And if something didn't go right, it's okay, I'll move on. So I think age definitely brings some pretty terrific benefits when it comes to careers.
Julie?
Yeah, I would say I think mine is empathy. I'm a very caring, empathetic person. I mean, I'm thinking of two of my colleagues who told me that they were pregnant, and I started crying in the hallway for them because I was just overjoyed. I just really care about people. I really care about people. I truly care about people, even if we don't agree on stuff, even if we don't see eye to eye on the work or on where I've landed with the law. I can set that aside and care about you as a human. And I think people see the authenticity in that, and they know that, okay, I might not like this legal advice Julie has given me, and she thinks it's risky, but I know that she really cares about this thing, so that would be my superpower.
Shane?
I'd say perseverance. I think, again, and Julie touched on this. I don't know everybody's background, but it seems like this applies to probably all of us and most people I know. I think the path is just kind of, it's a windy path, but it's just knowing that ultimately you're going to end up on the right side. You're going to end up where you should be. And everything will ultimately work out. And then two, like Julie, love of people. I absolutely love people. I mean, we're all so unique, have interesting backgrounds, may have had different situations growing up. And I just love talking to folks and just hearing about their background and hearing about their path.
I think for me, it's resourcefulness. There's a lot of very capable people in the world. But at the end of the day, knowing that I know how to figure things out, whatever they may be, whether it's how to change the toner in the middle of the night on a printer I've never touched before, or figuring out some obscure, legal issue in a country that I've never dealt with, I know I can learn. I know I can figure it out. And that gives me the confidence to take risks. As I think we've all highlighted, this is not a direct line. It's not you climb one rung, the next rung, the next rung. There's a lot of zigging and zagging. And sometimes you have to let go of something that's already certain in order to get to the next rung up. But you just got to trust that you're going to be able to pull it off. And the resourcefulness does that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Leah,
So
I'm so sorry to interrupt. I wish I had the clapping emoji because Alma just dropped the mic when she said, sometimes you got to let go of the rung, not knowing what's going to happen. That was the whole word, but okay. I'll go.
So I'm going to turn, it was a whole word, by the way, Alma. Yeah. So I'm going to turn to 2 questions from the audience, which touches on mentorship, sponsorship. Let's turn to that for a second. So all of us in some form or fashion have nurtured a mentor-mentee relationship, have nurtured a sponsor type of relationship or an advocate type of relationship. Can you talk about how you successfully do that? And then even further to that, how that relationship changes as you advance in your career. I'm going to say right now that one of my sponsors and frankly, mentors of mine actually has been Andrea here on the call, who has been such a great sounding board across my legal career. So I'm thankful to have her on the call today as well. But just so that the audience is aware of, the importance of that relationship that you develop to have someone outside of the organization and within the organization to receive that objective, fruitful feedback or advocacy. So I would love to hear from you guys, Alma, Shane, Julie, if you have had that experience and how it changes with time.
Yeah. I think the only one thing that I would say about mentorship and sponsorship, and maybe I'll just say more, well, it's a combination. When I first got my in-house role at the Department of Commerce, I Googled the role to find people that had done the role, and I found people who did it in the 70s. And I emailed them and sought them out. And one of them was like, I did this job when dinosaurs roamed the earth, but and they did it, they were in Republican administrations, some that, one of them was like, don't tell anyone I ever worked for this president. But, they were just white men, salt and pepper haired white men who were like, look, this world is not going to be fair to you. How do we help you? You want to come work at my firm when you leave the administration? And I was like, wait, what? I'm still here. I haven't even started. But what I'm trying to say is, I just talked to one of them last week, and this was from 2013. He's been mentoring me for 7 years and has supported me every step, whether in my personal or professional pursuits. And, this is not, I think, I'm not going to lie, I had a misnomer that I thought mentors needed to look like me because they would understand my perspective and the space that I was coming from. And that very early in my career, that's what I thought. And I realized that's a mistake. So I think everyone knows that, but in case you don't, your mentors don't have to look like you in order to understand you or seek to understand you or to really sponsor you and help you shift in your career. And those have been some of the most powerful mentorship/sponsorship relationships I've ever had.
Yeah, totally agree with Julie. Let's be real. Not all of us have the opportunity to have people higher up the ranks who look like us. If I was waiting for that, there's not that many. There's just not that many. I got to work at one of 5 companies. But the unexpected mentors are there, the people who don't look like you. And I think at the end of the day, the question, Leah, of how you nurture that and how you maintain that, it's a relationship. And just because they're in the mentor position and you're in the mentee position doesn't mean you don't have a lot to bring to the relationship. You have to water that. You have to nurture it. It's a personal relationship. If these people are going to care about you, you also have to care about them. It is a very real relationship, and you have to own it and treat it that way.
I think the only thing I'd just add is, I think rely on your network to help you develop relationships with people that can potentially serve as sponsors for you. I think I've been lucky in that in my career, Kilpatrick, Townsend, and Stockton, and even at Facebook, a lot of the sponsors that I've been able to identify were colleagues of, friends of mine, former colleagues of friends of mine, or former coworkers. So, through that connection with friends that they used to work with previously, I've been able to build those relationships because my friends have talked me up to them. And I've, at least that was the initial connection. And then I built my own connection, and as Alma said, continue to kind of water and grow that relationship and ensure that it's two-way, right? You don't want it to kind of feel like it's just, you're just taking from the sponsorship, from the sponsor, and not providing, anything of value. Even if it's internal, even if at a minimum, you're just kind of letting them know kind of what's going on at the level you're at, right? Or at your level or lower, kind of what the sentiment is within the company. I mean, so just kind of do what you can to ensure that it's two-way, but just, develop those relations, build on them, and just grow. And I think they're long-term, they're going to be super helpful to you.
Okay, great. And Shane, I actually think you kind of answered one of the questions in the Q&A, which is, have your connections and network help you determine what the path, exit strategy, future planning should look like? And I feel like we've touched on various different aspects of answering that question. I'm going to turn to one of the last questions, which is, how can leaders take away the S for Superman to let others know it's okay to be human right now? Do you have any experience with this?
Yeah, I do. I hope he doesn't get mad. I'm going to call out my chief legal officer, Rich Bear. Hope he doesn't get upset. The week that George Floyd was killed, on this particular day, or a couple of days later, my childhood friend was very close with George Floyd. So I was on the phone with her for like maybe an hour and a half in the morning, just, helping her, I won't go into detail, but just trying to be there for her. And then I dealt with a very difficult situation at work as well, that was in the community, not internally. That was something that was happening in our community. And and then he called me, my chief legal officer called me, and I like kind of broke into tears. Like I was trying to talk to him, but I couldn't hold it in because there were all these competing things happening at one time, and everything was compounding, and it all happened in like a 3-hour time frame. And I bursted into tears, and he was like, "Is it something I said?" And I was like, "No, it's just like all these things are happening like right now, like right now." And he was like, "Please stop crying." Like, he has daughters. So he's like, "Please stop crying. Like, I don't want to cry." And, like just very kind man. And he held space for me and said, "It's okay. It's okay to be like, not emotional, but like, it's okay to express yourself. It's okay to not hold things in. Give yourself some time. Let me know what you need." And to me, it meant a lot from a leader, where someone could take that as like a sign of weakness and say, "Oh, this person is weak," but it showed that like I'm human, and it showed that he's human, right? And doesn't see this as a machine. So I deeply appreciate that question about how leaders have held space. And my boss, my immediate boss is Bob, has held a ton of space, as well as I've just navigated some of the things in my personal life with returning back to Houston and being there for my community during this time. So I'm incredibly grateful that on top of COVID and on top of issues affecting the Black community, those are things I carry with me to work. I wish I didn't have to. I can't separate the two. These are things affecting my community. So it hurts me deeply. And my leadership has held space for me.
And thank you for that. I'm looking at the time, and unfortunately now we're supposed to be closing it out. I don't know where the time went. This was an absolutely wonderful discussion. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of close out our discussion with highlighting and re-emphasizing what we talked about, just in case people dialed in late, or just to make sure we're all on the same page as far as what we talked about and the advice and counsel that we're all given. And so here, just to highlight it, there's really 6 key points or themes that we talked about. So first, you want to focus on clear expectations from management and leadership. You want to understand their goals, their guiding principles of how they lead, what their expectations are as a manager, and how they are defining success, which is ultimately your North Star. You want to learn your narrative, make sure your story makes sense to you so that you're able to sell it with authenticity. You want to also make sure that you're building a proper support system within the organization to give you a little breathing room when you're sprinting uphill, both with advocates for yourself, but also those below and around you. Emphasis added on this fourth point, which is being flexible, being agile. Don't beat yourself up when things don't go perfectly the way that you've planned, because there's a larger plan just for you. And then the fifth point is be your best advocate and identify areas and other advocates that will support you because they may promote you better than you even promote yourself. And then the last point is for 5 superpowers, as we did that quick round robin: fearless, empathy, perseverance, and resourcefulness. And for me, frankly, it's also perseverance, because I've always persisted. So just using that quote for a second as well. So I just want to thank you again for everyone that is dialed into this call, that took time out of their busy day to learn how to maintain your job as in-house counsel. Know that whatever roadblock that you're dealing with, it's just a roadblock that will ultimately be your pathway to a greater success story. So thanks again for joining, and I'm going to hand it over to Kyle. Thanks, Kyle.
All right, that was awesome. Just really quickly to wrap this thing up, this is the second of 3 events with our host, Leah Perry. The next one is October 22nd, and it is how to advance your career. And so you'll see us marketing that via LinkedIn shortly. So if you'd like to come to that one, please register. Also, these events, our team works incredibly hard to put these together. So if you are interested in sponsoring one of these events, if you are interested in being a host or being a panelist, please reach out to us. Myself, Ashley, Vianney, Alex Tomowski on the team. We'd be happy to have a conversation as we're going to be continuing this all through 2021. So looking to line up sponsors, hosts, and panelists for everything that we're doing. Thank you for attending, and hopefully we get to see everybody again on October 22nd. Thank you so much to everybody.
Thank you. Thanks again.